me. And so we each get to own 350 Ford F-250s because of that, which is pretty cool. How do we do that? It's a pretty wild story. We build hardware right here. Right over there are people who are plugging things together and testing things under vacuum and filling stuff with epoxy. We have these spotter buoys that you'll see all over the place. I think we got some set up on the table there. These beach ball size sensor buoys that measure waves and winds and currents. We have subsurface sensors that can attach to them. And then very recently we announced the launch of a platform called Scout, which is a surface vehicle. So you can see a picture of it there in the middle. It has all the same sensing capabilities, but it can decide where to go and stay there for a long time, which is really cool. Hardware's fun. It doesn't do anything when it's sitting around on the shelf or sitting around in a warehouse. So we put them out in the ocean. We've thrown them out of planes. We've thrown them off of the backs of recreational yachts. People have put on fins and kicked out and dropped it and kicked home. Any way we can, we get them out there. We get a lot of them out there. So you can see an animation of the seeding of our Pacific fleet of sensors about 5 or 6 years ago. You can see a graphic visualizing all of the deployments that we've had in the open oceans and along the coastlines. So we've turned piles of hardware into piles of data all over the world. And then on top of that, we got to do some fancy math. We got to ingest that data. It runs through processing. It runs through forecast assimilations. And we have a forecast model that can beat NOAA and ECMWF, which is great. Still, that's not quite enough to save the shipping industry fuel and emissions. So on top of that data and on top of that assimilation and that first layer of processing, we focus a lot on the intelligence. What do you do with it? Like, how do you actually support decision makers? And I think that's a very relevant concern for the topic of the panel today. Everything from, routing vessels through weather to save 5 to 10% of fuel per open ocean crossing, which adds up to big dollars for them, it adds up to big emission savings for the world, to helping to narrow cones of uncertainties around hurricanes. And our goal, what we're trying to build, is the world's largest ocean intelligence platform. So it's a lot of hardware, it's a lot of data. The focus, though, is really on the humans that are consuming that and making decisions and trying to help make the world a better and more sustainable place. We're hiring, transition into shameless plugs, but we've got open roles across the board. This is the most eclectic group of people and disciplines you'll find anywhere. So check out the careers page and see if there's something that's up your alley. And then we're also going to have a webinar next Wednesday introducing the Scout in more detail. So if you might be interested in autonomous open ocean surface vehicles, tune in to check that out. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Maggie Fried, who's going to moderate this panel. Thanks, everybody. Welcome.
Hi everyone, happy Earth Day. We're excited to be here with all of you on Earth Day. As was mentioned, I'm Maggie Fried. I am at S2G Investments. S2G is a growth equity firm that invests across oceans, energy, and food and agriculture. And since pretty much the start of our Oceans Fund back in 2020, we've invested in ocean intelligence. We saw that gathering data from the oceans was expensive, it was extremely complex, and in some ways it can be dangerous. And so we set out to invest in companies that would change that and allow us to better understand the oceans. So we've invested in a satellite company, autonomous surface and underwater vessel companies, and in Sofar as well. And across all these companies, they serve a number of different industries. The shipping industry, as you heard, they sell into fishing industries, they sell into a number of different industries. But across all of that, they share the mission of protecting the oceans and conserving ocean resources, which is one of the things that we'll touch on today. So I'm very excited to be joined by this esteemed panel. And across the panel, you'll hear people with a variety of not only backgrounds, but companies and organizations that leverage different technology, gather different data, and use it for different reasons. And so, just like the work that I do, we are all committed to conservation in the oceans and leveraging data for that. So I am joined here by, you guys are now in a different order than my list, but Mitchelle De Leon, who's the Chief Impact Officer at SkyTruth, Mahfiruze Okten, who's a project lead at Sea Sounds Project at BayQuest, Dan Breyer, who's the head of product at Sofar Oceans, and Bill Sherrod, who's the Associate Director of the Hopkins Marine Station. So thank you all for joining me. To kick off, it would be great if you can briefly describe what kind of ocean data you collect, since it can be quite varied. How do you collect it? And although we'll get into this a bit more later, just quickly how it's used. And feel free to just go down the line.
Hi everyone, Mitchelle here. I'm with SkyTruth. SkyTruth is a conservation technology nonprofit that specializes in analyzing satellite imagery to uncover hidden environmental harms. Of course, the ocean is one of our focus areas. The ocean is vastly unmonitored, and that's where satellite imagery can potentially come in to support enforcement agencies, the environmental community, journalists, and policymakers to really drive protection for our ocean and our climate. One of the data sets that we collect is unoiled ocean, particularly from shipping vessels and offshore oil and gas infrastructure. And this data is being used to support enforcement efforts, investigative journalism, advocacy, and local community action.
Mahfiruze. I'm from BayQuest. I'm lead of Sea Sounds Project. Sea Sounds Project is an passive acoustic monitoring of humpback whales and the vessels to understand the impact of the vessel noise on the impact on whale localizations and behavior. So we collect, as I said, acoustic data with using Sofar's technology, Sofar's spotter sound, which we really fond of using it, and then really help us to calibrate and to work it better, and it's work in under any condition with quality sound acoustic information. Other than that, we have during our field trips, we have this acoustic listening lasts 30 minutes. During that time, we have minute by minute wildlife and surface observations. We pair those data all together so that we can have a comprehensive field report. And our aim is to be able to provide some sort of intelligence and decision-making process to prevent ship strikes in the San Francisco Bay Chat. Sorry, San Francisco Bay.
That's great. Hello everyone, welcome to Sofar. Dan, I'm the head of product here at Sofar Ocean. I didn't really set up everything and more than I would ever need to say, so it made my job really easy, which is great. The one thing I will add, and what I'm really excited to talk about with this panel is, while yes, we do a lot with the shipping industry and impact their abilities, our products are used by a variety of people for all kinds of end purposes, and that vastness really harkens back to the value of the information we collect and how important it is to us closing that gap for so many different industries, not just one particular one, and that's with exciting pieces that too.
Well, it's a tough group to follow, but hi everyone, I'm Bill. So at Hopkins Marine Station, we're part of Stanford University and really the Stanford Door School of Sustainability, and that's the newest school to be established at the university. First school in 70 years, first time they've had a school named after a donor. And the first department in that school was the Oceans Department, and the Marine Station is a part of the Oceans Department. Historically, it was for the last 130 years, it was a field station for marine biology. It is a field station for marine biology, ecology, developmental biology, evolutionary biology, as well as technologists, physical oceanographers. So it is evolving as both the needs of question and discovery are evolving. Science changes every couple of years. And the challenge that the school is out to take on is the greatest one facing humanity, and a lot of that centers around what goes on in our oceans. So the station is positioned to be both a long-standing research platform for understanding climate change as it affects sort of marine species, particularly in intertidal. So a lot of the data that's collected is observational data based on what we see in terms of changes of patterns of life of animals. There's a lot of data that's collected following the migration of animals to understand the physiology and the reasons why they move across the ocean, whether it be white sharks, whales, tuna. And then from the physical oceanographer standpoint, it's trying to understand and capture what's going on in the environment, physical changes to the ocean, acidity, temperature, and then the consequential effects those have on keystone ecosystems, whether it be coral reefs or kelp forests. Now the second hat, and that was as an operator, I did about 30 years in the Navy, driving ships and flying helicopters. So as an end user of this type of information, I have a completely different perspective on what intelligence is for oceans and decision making, right? It's about safety, it's about expediency, it's about fuel economy, some of those things. It's also about knowing what's going on in the world around you and in an environment that you can't really see. So how do you determine and understand where things are in an ecosystem or a domain where 70% of it is unknown? And so one of the goals of our national security infrastructure, and one of the goals of the Door School is to be able to have continuous understanding of what's going on our planet. And this type of technology is one of those key pathways to be able to do that.
That's great. I think one of my takeaways is that ocean intelligence is not just one thing, right? It is a whole suite of hardware, it is a set of processes, and so Dan, starting with you, although then I'll open it up for anyone else to answer, how do you think about this architecture, infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, that is ocean intelligence?
Okay, tough one. So as much as I would love to say that you buy a buoy and then bam, intelligence, that's not how that works. Even for our customers, no one buys our hardware because they want to. It's not fun, it's a necessity. And if there was a way we could have it so they could have that intelligence without it, absolutely. It's the least painful way of doing it. And the reason why that exists is because the area we're trying to observe has so many unknowns and is so difficult. No shade to people that are in space, but like the ocean is the hardest place we send things. Mm-hmm. It's just unbeatable. And so there's a reason why there's such a gap. So much that we don't know. And there's a reason why that means no one solution will fix that. Spotters are great. They have a very specific purpose. In situ observations and baseline. But then for you to get from there to intelligence, you need multiple layers and multiple solutions. And that's what this is about. It's for the end customer, they don't care about the discrete thing, they care about the decision they can make. What is the network of solutions they need to get there? And if that's spotters at the base, and then satellite coverage for something else, acoustics, or any other technology, that's the process to get from one data point to economic decision.
I can jump in. So we are using Sofar spotter sound hydrophone system, but there are other ways that we can understand the existence of a whale. For example, we can use eDNAs, we can use BTACs, we can use thermal cameras, we can use other technologies even that I cannot mention enough. So this is, as Dan said, I totally agree with you, this is layer by layer. And in order to make things more understandable, I think we need to see the ocean as a benefit it and as a public utility. When we see this as a public utility, then we can create or we can have the reason to create the necessary infrastructure. And this infrastructure is all about different software, hardware, satellite connection, AI models, and so on and so forth. So it's a very complex, but it's fun to work with it actually, because it provides so many diversity. You know, when you look at some of the deep sea creatures that was, for example, observed by the environment, and you see the shape and the, you know, the unbelievable way that they are living. So it's worth seeing ocean as our own public utility, and so we really need to own it and treat it in that way.
So, Maggie, I think one of the things for us to consider is the architecture depends on the question we're trying to answer. Mm-hmm. And when I think about intelligence, I think of two aspects of it. It needs to be relevant, it needs to be reliable. So what does it take to make intelligence relevant? It's got to be focused on the information that you need to make the types of decisions that you need to make. And then for reliability, there's got to be an accuracy, so a level of precision, and a level of timeliness. A lot of the data that we send out with sensors is very time late, and so we're dealing with models based on historic data, not what's actually happening in the environment. So, you know, there will be a lot of aspects that there will be duplicative overlap or redundancy in the types of systems used and the types of architecture necessary to sense, collect data, transmit data, do the analytics to distribute, and then enable informed decision making. But I think it starts with working from the problem you're trying to solve backwards, and through the different types of industries, then taking a macro view and saying, where are those overlaps? Because that's where the efficiencies will be found, and a lot of information sharing can be achieved out of it.
Two microphones. Yeah, I really resonate with all these points. The only piece I'd probably add is we really have to meet where the end users are already collecting and interpreting that data. When you speak to any enforcement agency, any ship operator, resource manager, they are inundated with a lot of data. They're inundated with a lot of regulatory requirements. And so we're providing one set of data set, which is chronic oil pollution. And so for us, it's really critical to collaborate with other data providers, ensure that we're building integrations that are valuable for end users, whether it's an enforcement agency or Coast Guard out in Southeast Asia who's navigating with geopolitical conflicts and pollution and illegal fishing. We have to really engage the end user. As a developer of platforms and data sets, oftentimes the tendency is to say, oh, we want the end user to end up on our platform. But collaboration is really critical to ensure that we're driving effective use cases.
So I think with that in mind, we can very much structure our conversation around the sort of process that you mentioned, which is starting with collecting the data, then sort of taking it to alongside sort of end users, analysis, predictions, and really figuring out how then it can eventually make the type of change that we want to see. So starting at the beginning of that whole process, Dan, I'm going to come back to you, is hardware. And you had mentioned already, very hard to put things in the ocean. Tell us what that is.
Oceans and crabs are undefeated. The space is hard. This space is hard because of technological challenges that you have to overcome and operational challenges that you have to overcome. And getting anything to cover that vast amount of area that is so dynamic and is to get the temporal and spatial scale that actually matters to make some of those things that you described happen is just such an undertaking. And because those crabs and those waves are so fierce, the way that we've tackled it to date has been large, heavy engineering, bespoke type processes and end products, right? Big survey vessels, big equipment that are. Man. I'd like to say that if you ask any scientists what they want, they would say everything at the highest precision. And I'm sure that they're right in some regards, but when it comes to this type of scale at a cost-effective way, that's just very difficult for us to be able to do. And so, at least so far, approach to tackling this is the opposite of saying, what can we do in a distributed way? What can we assimilate over a large area at very low cost, easy to deploy, almost essentially trainable, and use that in order to get a baseline foundation for deploying spatial scale. And so it's just not saying that we solved biofouling or we solved, large storm systems, but just acknowledging this is a harsh area, we have to tackle it a different way, such that we can still get at scale the data that we can use to then do the things that everyone else here wants to use with it. So that's how at least we looked at it.
And you have the hardware surviving in the ocean, and you also have getting the data back to where it can be used, and more we want real-time data, which makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, real-time data is, I use real-time in air quotes. Real-time means different things to different people. For all the ocean folk here, I think we all agree that if you get data this day that is real-time, that's pretty impressive. We use both primarily satellite and cellular technology. There are other ones that are coming out, which is really, really exciting, but it's still one of the greatest burdens of operational costs that are out there, getting that data to the actual end user, and that's one of the challenges. You can't just walk out and go pick it up.
I do think that right now the oceans and crabs are undefeated is the tagline for this panel. See whether we come up with anything better. So if we sort of go along in the process, Bruce, as you mentioned, the Sea Sounds project uses Sofar spotter tech to study the humpback whale behavior right here in the Bay. Tell us a bit more about how your data goes from this acoustic data to protection decisions.
So we are still working on it because this is running a project for an environmental cause is a challenging one. And we can do it only with the collaborations, like our collaboration with Sofar Ocean, our collaboration with Cornell University, our collaboration with other nonprofits. So that's the case. But so far, we've done 20 missions, field trips in San Francisco Bay, and what we found is, as usual, maybe it's very expected result. We see sizzling bacon sound coming from pistol shrimps. And that shows that they are there, especially near the Golden Gate. Another anecdote that I really want to share is, of course, we detected lots of whale sounds. But in one of our field trips, we also saw an entangled humpback whale. And, that was a great discovery in a way for us to be able to locate that whale. And we contacted the organizations that's trained for whale rescue, and they came and they released that whale. So I think whatever the challenges are so far that we've been going through, that's the prize, that's the award for us. I cannot say enough that how much I feel so profoundly in a way, that's the, I think, pinnacle of my life in a way, because we started this project from scratch, and then, with the collaborations and all this ecosystem that makes it available. So this distressed whale, we have the recordings of this distressed whale, and that's another good data point for scientists to be able to use if they can collect enough information on stress vocalizations of the whales. Maybe we can really detect a distressed whale by hearing their sounds acoustically. So that's the beautiful part of it. With this data, our aim is to be able to help ship slowdowns, speed reductions in the San Francisco Bay Area. And today, I read the news that today is a starting day for voluntary ship slowdowns in the San Francisco Bay Area. And another good news, I think it's Earth Day. So Endangered Species Act also just withdrawn. It wasn't going to the floor of the House. So these are such great results of today. So other than that, what we want to do is we provide ship operators, ferry operators with the real-time data that gives and help them make the decision to slow down whenever there is a whale on their way. But for the ships or for any vessel in the ocean, you cannot just put brakes and then stop. So you have to get the alert way before that. So our aim is to give the timely warnings to the operators of the vessels. And we want engineers to develop more electric motor ships or vessels. We want them to make engines having less sound. We want also the fishing industry, especially crab pots, to be lineless. And we also want to highlight a way for seasonal changes in the shipping routes, depending on changing migration patterns of the whales with the climate change.
I think you're starting with the fact that shrimp can sound like sizzling bacon. You go from that type of data or data about with whale acoustics, and that translates into information for vessel operators. That's pretty significant. And I think one thing that we've seen time and time again from startups in this space is they can collect data, the data can be really interesting, but it's very challenging actually for people to know what to do with it. And so I would love for the rest of the panel to answer the question of, how do you talk about how you translate data into decisions, and are there any challenges? I'm sure there are. What challenges, whether political or technical, exist in making that translation from data to action?
So I think going back to the prior career of taking data and trying to make informed decisions is tied to what problem are you trying to solve, or what are you trying to accomplish, and then how does that information, those insights, enable your decision making. So there is this there's this sort of secret sauce that is in everyone, which is sort of their decision schema. And it's through your professional development, how you make decisions of what data matters in your domain. And you can very quickly sort of identify and discern what matters and what's going to help you make a decision and what is perhaps not. A challenge with that is, I hear bacon in the ocean, what's going on, right? New data, and all these technology companies, there's new data sources that, back to this question of sort of reliability and relevance, it's really easy to get drowned in all these inputs and sort of lose the ability, particularly when you have to make very timely decisions, right? A portion of my life I was driving a nuclear powered aircraft carrier, and we had to get from point A to point B in order to do things we needed to do. In many cases, in order to be able to sleep at night, you got to give some young professionals who don't have the same seasoning experience some direction on this is what right looks like, and if you are uncertain, give me a call. The information necessary to help them make decisions and not place at risk everybody that's on that vessel matters. The ability to get where we need to be when we need to be there matters. The ability to do so respecting international norms, not getting any wildlife hurt, right? Because you still have to be mindful of marine disturbances or potential there. So all of those things start to come into play in terms of the types of decisions that you need to make and what information comes in that is relevant to do that. So it's not just one thing. And an interesting space for us is to evolve how we make decisions. Regulatory agencies are very reliant on data, with certain data. And so when a nonprofit comes in with data or a startup comes in with, hey, all this great data, like, it's great, I'm not really sure I can use it, let alone how I use it. So I think those are the challenges for us to consider in this decision-making portion of this new data set.
Your next man.
Just piggybacking off that point, one of the emphasis for my team is really around capacity building to ensure that data translates eventually to action. When we're talking about enforcement agencies, for example, it's really critical for us to partner with different groups like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the US Navy Sea Vision Program, the Allen Institute of AI's Skylight Program, Skylight Tool. All of these different platforms, data providers, multilateral groups have capacity building programs for the end users that we want to use our data. In the case of chronic oil pollution, there are training coast guards directly that are largely under-resourced agencies. So it's been really important for us to show up where the enforcement agencies are actually receiving their training on maritime domain awareness. As I noted earlier, all of these agencies are really struggling to navigate this ever-evolving toolkit. In this room, we might be quite aware and tech savvy in terms of all the different ocean monitoring tools that are available. But when I'm talking with Coast Guard in the Philippines, they are struggling to navigate all the different tools that are available to them. Some of them are commercial, some of them are free, like our tools. So for us, training and capacity building and really highlighting the limitations as well, and being realistic of what satellite data can provide. There are inherent limitations to satellite technology, so we really have to be transparent as data providers on the spatial and temporal limitations of that data. And we always say time link as an emphasis because it really is not a near real-time source for most of our end users. By the time our detections reach the end user, that the shipping vessel that likely polluted their waters has long left. And so the resource manager or the enforcement agency is not able to deploy their assets in time. And so that's a really important part of our work on capacity building.
So Maggie, I think one of the things for us to consider is how data, particularly into these agents, whether public or private, intercepts the bureaucracy. Because when we're talking about systems and collecting from deployed sensors, moving data, it goes back to oftentimes a shore-based place where it's consolidated, compiled, and then redistributed back out towards the operational units. Sometimes that's great. So all the data that go in, all these partnerships, it's still from an end user's perspective. I'm still getting it from the same source in many cases, right? I would get it from Fleet Miracle, and they would give me the predictions and the weather products to let me know what's going on in the environment I'm going into. And so I still wind up not having necessarily the knowledge or insight of the other data sources, but instead I'll get a bureaucratic product as a result of that. Conversely, a lot of the opportunity is what we refer to as computed edge, right? The operators in space sometimes need to have those insights right away, not relying on it to go on some sort of technology bridge back to the shore establishment for processing, a simulation, then determining what you need, and then sending it back out, and then trying to make the decision of, because that eats up all that time in this, right? So there's a balance in terms of back to the problem we're trying to solve and for whom, and how we think about data and what decisions we're making will vary.
So I think we're in Silicon Valley, we're talking about how do we process a large amount of data, how do we turn it into something that's predictive and useful. We obviously have to talk about AI. So starting with you, Mitchelle, if you could talk about how SkyTruth uses machine learning and AI to detect things like oil spills, and any other ways that you are leveraging that technology.
So for us at SkyTruth, we're all about creatively using what's available to us and largely applying AI to publicly available satellite imagery, largely from the European Space Agency Sentinel-1 mission. So we're applying computer vision to synthetic aperture radar imagery that's all freely available, has great coverage in coastal areas, great coverage for major shipping lanes, areas that have significant oil and gas activity. So those areas have, relatively speaking, depending on the area, a high oil spill or chronic oil pollution issue, especially in the global south. So for us, artificial intelligence or machine learning is really all about increasing efficiency in the analysis of satellite imagery. It used to take a single human analyst weeks, if not months, if ever, to be able to identify a single oil spill in the ocean. And so satellite imagery combined with artificial intelligence drastically reduces the amount of time it takes to analyze and sort through imagery. So there's a lot of opportunities that I see in terms of expanding how much and how frequently we're able to detect these types of issues. For us, oil spills is really the tip of the iceberg. It's probably the easiest thing that we can spot from space, especially from SAR imagery. So we're always looking for creative ways. I just got off a call this morning with our R&D team thinking about what else should we be doing. And everyone was pitching up all the different ideas that we've heard from our community of users. One of the areas that we've heard a lot about is marine debris and how we might be able to use satellite imagery and computer vision to detect all sorts of marine debris, and also the combination of commercial satellite imagery that has higher resolution than what's available with Sentinel-1. But there's a world of opportunities, and I think we're really excited about expanding monitoring in the high seas in particular. A lot of the coverage in Sentinel-1 is largely in near the coast, and so with the high seas treaty now in place, there's a lot of opportunities for us to expand monitoring and detection of different types of human activity at sea. And last that I want to plug is we're partnering with Global Fishing Watch, which is a nonprofit organization that SkyTruth founded, to map all human activity at sea. So we're really looking for creative ways to detect all sorts of pollution and human impacts, industrial impacts at sea, and ensuring that this type of data that we're generating ends up with decision makers.
In our case, for us, AI helps in two ways. One way is the detection of the different whale species, which has different, which creates sound in different frequencies. But their sound, especially humpback sound, is also at the same frequency with the ship. So it's very important to discern in a recording whether it's a whale or it's a vessel. And the other thing that we focus on is after having the locations of each acoustic recording, or the surroundings of it, not the exact locations because we cannot do it at this moment, but then we can feed the models for helping the whale highways, where they are moving, how they are moving. These are also just reflects or have access to the dashboard of the ship operators. So it's not done yet, but this is our aim, and we are working our way through for it.
Yeah, there's something you mentioned which really resonates, which is making sure that what we're doing is purpose-built. It's solving an actual thing. And I think historically, when people have tackled it, they focus on that, and so they build an end-to-end solution for just that thing, and it does that fairly well. but then it's not fungible for all the other uses that you would want that pipeline to be used for. And while absolutely, just like a buoy won't solve all your problems, and your AI is no silver bullet, but it adds fungibility, it adds dials that you can put into that stack that allows more flexibility of what you can do with data and information that you collect. And that's what's exciting, because it means that the same thing that you're doing, the hard stuff that you're doing, is then easier for other people to then use that same, piggyback on top of it. And I'll give some examples, at least what I think of. We're talking about basically detecting whales and the cost of telemetry, how expensive it is. If one of our spotter sounds in the open ocean wanted to send 10 seconds of audio through a satellite, just not even knowing whether a whale is there, just because, it costs us relatively $10,000 to $20,000. Right, and no idea if there's a whale there, but that's what it would cost. But that doesn't make any sense, because it's going to go back to our back end, we're going to run GPU processors on it, a machine learning model that will detect it and say, nope, that's just shrimp. Instead, we can compress that model and move it to the edge of our buoy, have it run on that acoustics, and instead of a large 10-second audio file, a 1-bit whale, no whale, yes, no, can be transmitted. That's amazing. But that same dialing now can go to numerical, but can also be used by anybody else. Those same models can be updated and run on the same data set. So it's just that ability to play with what is collected and processed where and where it can be federated to opens up the space for people to have access to things that we never had. Same with like aerial imagery. What else could you do collect from the same image? It's just a world of possibility.
May I add something? What you said is actually covers also standardized data, so that each data point can speak to each other and there won't be any barriers. And so this means that there must be more collaboration in between different organizations, government organizations, nonprofits, academia, and so that we can really speak the same language in terms of data and in terms of our collaborative space.
Yeah, I think that same language and understanding is really important. I've watched at the fringe of the Beltway in DC, where a lot of buzzwords related to AI are thrown about, but it's still a mysterious black box. And it gets back to sort of your comment with that it depends on the problem that we're trying to solve, right? AI is an umbrella term for a bunch of different uses and a bunch of different applications that we can, whether it's taking your platform and having it instead of drift, maintain a station, and it needs to have the right input, so it's doing the processing to maintain the station. It is, I think, from a senior decision leader perspective, it is going to be an incredibly valuable tool that doesn't tell us what is happening. It tells us what the outcomes are based on the probability of what our decisions would be from that insight. So we get information, we then have a choice to act or not act, or act in a certain way, right? What are the options, the range of options that we want to exercise? The AI processing has the potential to give us probability of outcome to help us make a better informed decision that otherwise we're relying on our intuition, right? Which is wholly flawed because it's just your style, right? And so how do you then wind up with using all this data, using the historical data, bringing it to me to help make an informed decision that are more likely to understand the probability of outcomes based on your course of action. That's insight from intelligence.
I think that's what we're trying to do across the board, right? Is better, more informed decisions, regardless of the application. Recognizing that AI as a topic could be an entire panel itself. I'm gonna throw a question to you, Bill, which could also be a panel in and of itself. But what's the right balance between open data and proprietary data when it comes to ocean intelligence, and who do you think gets to decide?
I honestly don't have an answer for that because it's a wicked complex problem. It rests on, I think, two fundamental questions. Is it a commercial service? Are we going to do insight as a service, right? As a business model, and then how does that generate revenue? What's the value proposition for all of that? Again, it sort of depends on the industry. But a lot of the industries that are most affected by it are either going to be public or nonprofit space, right? So the affordability of that for nonprofits that are reliant upon philanthropic support to meet their mission, really to close the gap, right, where public policy doesn't meet the need, right? That's the challenge space. So what is the value or the business case for something that is maybe considered a public good, right? I think there will be, so GPS is a great example. Right? I think when GPS was developed, it had a specific purpose, and then there was recognition that there's a lot of value in GPS being opened up for broader use cases across various industries. There's still a national security component of GPS with greater precision, greater fidelity. So you can't have the two things, but it's the spirit of precision that would be the difference, right? That allows, here's the commercial good, because you don't need down to a meter squared, you need within a mile, right? And that may be the model for us to think about ocean data in the same way in terms of value and who is the stakeholder, user, owner moving forward.
I think really resonating with all those points. As a nonprofit data provider, we've been grappling with that question. Shouldn't they be using commercial data providers? We're a nonprofit service provider, and we built our tools specifically for the environmental movement, nonprofits who don't necessarily have the resources to dig into ocean data. And so our goal ultimately is to capitalize the market to act on the ocean data gap and ensure that there is a higher level of precision on different detections that we're able to provide as a nonprofit provider, largely using publicly available satellite imagery. So our hope is that we're able to demonstrate this as a valuable in-demand use case that governments are digging into, and that there is a market for it for folks to, especially in the private sector, to dig into.
As BayQuest, any data that we collected is an open data because our aim is also to foster citizen scientist concept because actually the public also is in this discussion too, especially for whale sightings or any sighting, any wildlife sightings, any oil spill. We need everyone to get connected to a platform and then really feed the data into it. So we also want to be that data provider. If any scientist, any institution wants to use that data, it's open data. We are a nonprofit, and our aim is just to increase awareness and protect the whales. But of course, there is a fine line, and I think in case of Dan and they are adding a layer on that data and making it insight, which is a valuable insight that informs decision making. So that's the a difficult balance, but they need to protect their investments because they have investors, they have all these people working together. So we need to find the nice balance between where commercial starts and where open data starts. And who should decide on it? I think everyone sits on this table, nonprofits, academia, scientists, technology companies, blue companies or marine industry, government officials, and just try to make a decision altogether. I know that the more you have, the less you get a decision, but still, we need everyone's voice so that we can make informed decisions.
Recognizing that we want to hear your voice and have some time for Q&A, I am going to give the last question, at least for me, for the panel. So, lightning round. Thinking as, outside of your professional self and thinking about just someone who's passionate about the oceans, what do you see as the biggest opportunity in ocean intelligence right now?
Collaboration. The bringing together of for-profit, a startup, a government. We do it, but we do it somewhat ad hoc, a little bespoke, I think is the way to describe it. But instead having this concerted effort of, we need to understand the ocean, and what does that mean? And then bringing in and looking at ways where we can resource share, right? And the resource is time, it's treasure, it's capacity, it's capability, right? So everyone has something to bring, and these types of collaborative consortia that want to, move the needle. And when you assemble a group that has unique strengths, then that's where you're going to find those outcomes. But until we do that, we incentivize that as opposed to incentivize individual efforts, then we will not be pacing the challenge correctly.
Just say that. That's really good. That's definitely collaboration. Since I have to give a different answer, I would probably say what's exciting for me is that we're at a tipping point where the technology is no longer the barrier. It's we're past that, and it's really okay. How do we move into a place where what we're focusing on are the problems we're solving, and how we can scale that aspect of it? Not can we or how could we or what we use. Those things are becoming more truthful, and that's exactly.
I think today is a good example because we are coming from different walks of the ocean conservation or marine science, marine tech, and we come together to express our concerns and our ideas, and this is the way that we can galvanize the cooperation, collaboration all together. So this is a starting point. And the other thing that I'm so excited is, every day I'm reading another acoustic study about whale detection, and too much data, too much information all around us. The collaboration not only stay in the local level, it should also be international level, so that it makes sense. And the more data, the better predictive analytics, and the better precision AI models, and the future is really hopeful for me. I'm excited, actually.
For me, it comes down to leadership can come in many different forms, and with openness, ocean data, and ocean intelligence, there's many types of end users that don't have to be institutional. As a former youth climate activist, it's really exciting to me to see action. Whenever I attend an ocean conference, there's always such energy and excitement from youth climate and youth ocean activists. And just the promise of the next generation of talent to build new creative solutions using technology, using the appropriate engagement forms to really catalyze action at scale. I think that to me is probably the most exciting thing.
I think bringing that all together, we have in the ocean intelligence space really exciting technology across a number of different types of hardware and use cases, but it remains a space that is really challenging, whether it's crabs in the ocean that can defeat all, or the cost of transmitting data back to land. It's still a really complex space, and there's a lot of opportunity to come in and collaborate, whether private sector, public sector, academia, to be able to enable us to make better, faster decisions across a number of industries and across a number of use cases, whether it's shipping industry or youth activists. So really inspiring to hear from all of you and the work that you're doing, and thank you so much. We wanted to take some time to take Q&A from the audience. I don't know if we have someone who's running a mic. If not, I'll do it. What questions do you have?
I can try yelling if everyone can often the difficulty of getting all data together in one place to make informed decisions or decisions. I'm curious what's stopping one of you from taking your platform and then pulling in data from all of these different sources. Like, what's the difficulty? And especially with AI, and there's plugins where you can start interacting with via an AI and pulling all this data from different sources. I'm curious where you see that going, and if you've ever contemplated owning any of that with your own data.
Jen, I don't know if you want to take this to plug Bristlemouth, because I think it's really exciting.
That's a good idea. So I think that's, there are quite a few people that are in the space that are trying to do that. And I do think the new tooling and technology allows us to do that in a much faster and stronger way, taking unstructured data from a variety of different sources and combining it together. We're doing this on our end of trying to fix it. There's two main core challenges. One, as I mentioned here, standardization. When you are taking data, especially data that is not yours, from a place that you do not know or have governance or understanding over, that's really hard. It's not just a matter of it's unstructured. It's like you don't know anything about it. Can it even be? Is it correct? Can it be used in a way that you want it used? So there's the whole challenge of the chain of custody of that data. And we're trying to tackle that by having things become more standardized. But that's really hard, right? Bluetooth didn't come out overnight, but it took time for everyone to adopt something that then would allow things to transfer. You mentioned Bristlemouth, it's hard to crack it. We're not alone. It's a community of people that are trying to do this. The other challenge is, even if you get to a world where you can create that data lake, you have all the data in one place, while that is helpful, it's still, you need that last mile of how it's used. That's where all the value is. We're getting better at solving the challenges of obtaining and pressing it, totally. But it's the last mile of working through the different legal and collaborative and delivery of that to move the needle somewhere is the hardest part, right? So it's a lame way of me saying yes, I think that challenge will get easier, but the last harder challenge will only get harder. I'll give a really quick example of what I mean by that is the same data can be used differently if we're not careful with it. If it just lives in that one container, people will not be able to, those acoustic information won't, if we have acoustic detections of a whale, if you are driving through that zone, you want that data immediately. That's a very different experience than if you're trying to do a large anthropogenic study of how it impacts over years. And so what matters more is how it's compressed and delivered, not the collection there. That makes sense.
Yeah, and really quick follow on, is there a governing body you're working with to develop standards, and who is that?
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion of how do you create a standard? It's how do you create a bill? Yes, so there are universal bodies, and there are known entities I believe and others that have those. We can talk more about it outside of this panel, but yeah, there's creating something that's universal.
Thank you.
Just a real quick add-on for consideration there. What I hear is sort of the democratization of data, right? Open access for everyone. Two challenges that I've observed in two different domains. One is suitability of the data, right? So there's a ton of data out there, not all that's suitable to be put into a model. It's very time, talent intensive to clean the data to make it then accessible. The other aspect that is probably sometimes a bigger challenge is folks don't want to share it. And they got different reasons, right? Whether it be proprietary, this is their golden egg. In the research space, oftentimes it's tied to the discovery of the question they're trying to answer, and researchers are very territorial and protective of that. And they don't want that information getting poached because that may preclude, somebody will beat them to the publishing, somebody will beat them to the next grant, right? And so there is an incentive structure at play that actually rewards keeping that information close hold, which is a direct challenge to this idea of we need to get the data out there. So it's not just what's what's the international norm and standard, right? It is also the surrounding ecosystem and the incentive structures in both of those that then are necessary to understand before you get to that open access data.
I have a question to add to that. If you could, just for the layman, just kind of describe the geography that we're talking about. It sounds like people are using things for a region to see what's invisible in the region that they're working. But looking at the map back there, it looks like you could possibly calculate the geophysical fluid dynamics of the hemispheres. So what scale is it collected and applied generally? And I have more questions for you, Dan, afterwards, if you
Sure.
wouldn't mind.
Sure,
I don't want to
absolutely.
take up this time.
So when you're talking about what scale are we collecting for a particular device, or
On average, what scope, geographic scope is data collected and employed using your technologies?
so each of our cute little buoys over there hanging out, they collect data on basically an hourly basis, and they transmit that back. And we've got about anywhere between 600 to 800 of them free floating all around the globe at any given time, depending upon seasons. So yeah, we have pretty good coverage across everywhere that the currents push them. And they're collecting the scale and range of how usable that data is. It really depends on where they are. Right? In the open ocean, it's easy to interpolate different points. When you get into coastal areas, things like the imagery and other stuff really kind of changes its accuracy or its ability to interpolate. So that's kind of the base coverage. I think to your question, like how do we use that? It depends on what you're trying to assimilate or what fidelity you think you're trying to assimilate. Like for routing vessels, we need to know basically what the wave heights and the currents would be across the main shipping areas. But that's very different if you're trying to do like an ocean mixing model for sea and air for carbon, carbon flux. And it's a very different set, and you may need a different set of, both spatial and precision.
How many are in the bay?
The area behind me?
San Francisco Bay.
I think counting the ones that our engineering team have told me or not told me that they have deployed, probably close to around like 20, 25, probably somewhere in that range. That's kind of the fun part, is like I always find out later that there's more ones that I did not know that were there. And just to connect back to other points, is what's neat about our systems is that people have the choice to make the data public. So they may have a very specific use case that they want, but they can make it available to anybody to do anything with. So
Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess I've been kind of peripherally around this space for, I guess, 2 decades. And coming from an engineering commercial background, chloroform and stuff like that, some of my observations is the technology is blazing ahead. So there's this tremendous gap in terms of how much to apply it to the space. Generally, it hasn't been a good space for venture capital. There's only been a few examples that really drive it commercially. So there's not as many people working on it. Right? I've, helped, incentivize citizen science and things like that with some of the founders here. So what can we do to get more people involved? I mean, there's so much that can be done, right? And collaboration, obviously, because every time I read a paper, it's like, oh, I never knew about this. They're not working in open source. They're not collaborating with other people. I built, a hydrophone that somebody published from NOAA decades ago and gave it, and it's being used. More stuff could be, kind of maker movement ideas can be made available, and people like myself or others could build it and make it available and spread the word, essentially, and more data gets collected. So how do we get more people to study this area, more leadership coordination, what can be done? I mean, you're in the university, the limitations of interest?
Well, so it's a wicked problem, right? It gets back to, from a university standpoint, it's either about, depending on the type of university, right? Is it there to produce workforce, right? Like in our, say it's the CSU system, it's not considered a research university, it's there to workforce, right? And then you have these research institutions where that's the primary focal point. So there are initiatives, efforts. There's one through Embar in Monterey Bay, the Aquatic Research Institute, and SynCU is called Syncro, right? And that's a collaboration with a bunch of different folks. And really what that's trying to do is take technologies and look at the ability to adapt it for a research purpose, right? Can something that's out there be used in a different use case than perhaps it was intended? And then where does that go, right? It helps in terms of collecting the data for the research kind of problem, that question is trying to be answered, the problem to be solved. But it also opens the door in terms of alternative markets or uses, right? It starts to pivot the focus a little bit from a singular, this is what I thought was going to be, now, I can also do this, I can do that. I think building the ecosystems is going to be critical. We have, between here in Monterey Bay, we have this incredible centrality of talent, capital, mentors, right? Innovators, and a hungry workforce, right? And in the Monterey, Central California region, one of the greatest challenges is a brain drain, right? There's not economic opportunities. And folks are up there, and then typically they mostly migrate away because they come to the Bay Area, that's where the tech jobs are, that's where the growth opportunities are. How do we create that ecosystem in a region that has blue economy as its cornerstone, right? Where this type of innovation then contributes to the conservation efforts and initiatives that continues to protect our oceans and grow the research portfolios and our deeper understanding, while also creating high-value jobs in industries adjacent to where they're used. I think that is a challenge that's not for a single entity to do. That's for communities to build and come together and see the opportunity and commit to it.
Okay. Hi, thanks so much for all of your thoughts. As you look forward at the scale up and commercialization of these technologies, what are you thinking about who pays for them? In my organization, we help get concessional climate finance into the hands of lower income countries that are doing adaptation and first-order science. Are you looking at them as clients potentially, and then what about the insurance industry?
Yes. No, so in the same way that I like to very lovingly and jokingly say no one buys everybody because they want to, in the same regard as like, what is the actual end result that we're trying to accomplish here with all the technology that we're doing? And it's buying down risk and mitigating risk and uncertainty. And unfortunately, a lot of the places that have the highest amount of risk and uncertainty are the places that don't have the funding ability to do anything or to know that exists. At least on our end, what we're seeing that collaborative component come in is that more and more entities are coming together to try and pull together either World Bank funding or other resources to install and build out that infrastructure where it is most needed and least available. That's a really simple way of describing how difficult and hard this is. I'm sure you know it better than I would, but there's immense opportunity there. The challenge really is making it visible and making those connections such that that can happen. Because from our experience, it moves at a much different speed and pace than commercial kind of deals. And it's really the burden is on us to show that investment, that long-term investment of creating those connections and opportunities, working with these NGOs and groups to install, whether it's a network of concentric rings devices around, the Bahamas or Barbados, that will actually yield an impact to the local population that's there. And that's not something that you turn in a quarter or you turn at the end of the year, but it's something that we strive to do because we know it's the best way to reduce that risk.
I think just to build on that, and this I think goes to both questions, it's just how do you bring in the private sector? And it goes back to the discussion we've been having, which is really helping established industries understand what it is that they can do with this data. I think it's really easy to feel like you have very cool and unique data, but what we see time and time again is that companies go to an established insurance company and you feel like this has got to be a home run. Obviously, they can use it, and one, don't fully understand how to use it, and two, are like, we're a multi-billion-dollar company, we're doing good. Why do we need we have our own data sources, why do we need you? And so I think one of the ways in which we can scale is really that education piece and doing a better job of whoever it is that we're going out to and whatever geography, really being able to demonstrate sort of the change differential that you have with this new data versus perhaps legacy data. And I think we'll find it increasingly important with climate change when we're building models, because we'll find that historical or models that rely on historical data are no longer accurate, and so being able to pull in more recent real-time data to build models will become increasingly important across a number of industries. Do you want to be our final question?
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting panel.
That's right.
Okay. Following up on this use cases, like who's going to pay for it, and who this arms appeal to, Michelle, SkyTruth, I'm just wondering if you could point to maybe a success story where you found an oil spill and then that required some accountability by the perpetrator in that. I mean, this is a big issue of overall pollution.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, have it, if there's 20 to 25 boys in our own bay, not all, I don't think, are BayQuest. I'm just curious, like, who are your customers or how are you tackling that?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for us since we launched our Cerulean platform a little 2 or 3 years ago now, and we've really built a global network of enforcement agencies that are actively using the tool. And so, I'm not able to share the specific use cases that enforcement agencies, because they typically hold that pretty close to themselves in terms of the actual enforcement action. But we've definitely had some really interesting case studies where a ship was boarded because of satellite data, and that was the impetus for further investigation. And we've seen it time and time again. It's really just an indicator of other types of vessel misbehavior at sea. If they are polluting in their waters, they might be responsible for other types of misbehavior. Is what we found in the different conversations that we've had with enforcement agencies. But we've also had a wide range of investigative journalism use cases that are using cerulean data, for example, in understanding the nexus between AIS falsification, dark vessels, and pollution, and also with illicit traffic of goods. So that's been a really interesting story for us as well, especially with all sorts of geopolitical issues that are affecting the ocean. And we have an ongoing study right now on the extent of impacts from pollution impacts from AIS falsification. So that there's a lot of really exciting work that journalists are doing by taking our data, and advocates are doing, whether it's Greenpeace in Romania that took our data to understand the extent of impacts from offshore oil and gas production in the Black Sea, or partnering with advocates in Brazil who are understanding the impacts of offshore oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico, or just more broadly in the most critical ecosystems around the world. It's been really interesting to find creative use cases where our users are combining different types of data, not just chronic oil pollution data, but other types of ecosystem data and vessel traffic data.
To answer your question of who's using those buoys, so what's really neat is a variety of folks. We've got classic research and academia, so Berkeley, Stanford, UC Davis all have systems that they put out in the water to do a variety of things that they're looking at. We've got commercial applications, we've got environmental groups that are looking at sediment transport and the effectiveness of installing sea traps. We've got authorities, so the San Francisco port actually actually, if you walk down here on the Embarcadero, you'll see these lovely, larger yellow buoys attached to our smaller cuter buoys. Those are the ports that they're using in order to basically determine the erosions happening on the seawalls. It's kind of right here, and you can see the overtopping and flooding and walked here king tide. And to a variety of folks, probably my favorite one though is actually a buoy that's down in Half Moon Bay. It's in Mavericks, which is a fantastic surf spot, and they publish that data. And so, while I'm sure it's for their very important research, it's an amazing tool to use. It's a good swell day. It's all kinds.
Great, and I'm sure Dan will be around in this networking session after this to answer more questions. I just want to give another thank you, a round of applause to our panel. Thank you so much.